The story of Julia Wendell wasn't about a Polish girl. It was about you. It was about that part of you and of me that desperately needed a happy ending to a haunting, high-profile disappearance. And they knew how to weaponize that universal need. Let's be honest. When this sensational story ignited, a flicker of hope caught in your own heart. Should we be ashamed of that? Hope isn't a flaw. It's a vital instinct. For almost 20 years, the McCann case has been a dark, echoing room in our collective mind. A story with the final page torn out. Our brains despise an information void. They can't stand the suspense of a half-open door. We crave an answer, any answer, just to finally flick the light switch and find peace. Julia didn't sell a lie. She offered that elusive switch, a seductive promise to end the darkness. And we, weary of stumbling in the shadows, instinctively reached for it. This analysis isn't to critique her, and certainly not to judge the public's reaction. It's an invitation to understand the profound grip a compelling narrative has on the human psyche. If you're ready to use this case not as a window into her claims, but as a mirror reflecting your own soul's deepest needs, stay with me. We're going to uncover why the true deception isn't the lie they tell us, but the story we are hopelessly conditioned to believe. To grasp why we needed Julia's story to be true, we must first understand a fundamental truth about our minds. The human brain fights tooth and nail against one thing above all: uncertainty, the agonizing ambiguity of not knowing. In psychology, this is called the need for cognitive closure. It's a complicated term for a simple, visceral feeling. Imagine that half-open door in a dark hallway. You can't relax. Every other thought is background noise until you know what lies behind it. Your mind requires the door to be definitively open or closed. The in-between state is a form of psychological torment. We often prefer a terrible answer, one that frightens us, to no answer at all. A bad truth allows us to cope, plan, and react, fight or flee. Uncertainty, however, leaves us paralyzed. The Madeleine McCann case is, quite simply, the world's most famous half-open door. For almost 20 years, it has stood there in the hallway of our collective consciousness, neither confirmed nor solved. This unending suspense creates a chronic anxiety, a never-healing wound. Then, into this profound emotional void, Julia appears. And she doesn't offer a rigorous investigation or hard truth. She offers something far more compelling: the promise of closing the door, the tantalizing possibility of an end, the promise of closure. Our minds, desperate to relieve the chronic pain of uncertainty, latched onto this promise with everything they had, often overruling logic. Was our true goal relief rather than the cold, hard facts? This search for relief is not new. The storyline Julia presented is one of the most ancient and potent narratives embedded in our cultural fabric, the myth of the lost and found child. This script is written into our cultural DNA. Consider Persephone in Greek mythology, who was whisked away to the underworld. Her mother, the goddess Demeter, was so consumed by grief that the earth withered into an eternal winter. The search for the missing daughter became the quest for the return of spring, the return of life itself. Or think of the real-life tale that became a legend: Grand Duchess Anastasia Romanov. After the devastating event that claimed the Russian imperial family in 1918, a persistent rumor emerged. The youngest daughter, Anastasia, had somehow survived the ordeal. Decades later, a woman named Anna Anderson appeared in Berlin, claiming the princess's identity. She had no solid proof, and her story was full of inconsistencies, but the world was ready to believe. Why was the public so eager to overlook the gaps in her story? The original story was a tragedy without redemption. Anastasia's survival offered a small, crucial flicker of light, providing a slightly less agonizing ending. Anna Anderson, just like Julia Wendell, wasn't selling facts. She was selling a better version of the story. Each of these tales, from Persephone to Anastasia to Julia, is a shining coin tossed into the same deep, dark well, the well of our desire for redemption. The shape of the coin changes, but the desire of the person throwing it is always the same. The stubborn hope that loss isn't the final word. This deep-seated desire explains why Julia's story achieved such viral traction. It wasn't just a hoax, it was a placebo, specifically a narrative placebo. In medicine, a placebo is a sugar pill, a substance with no active ingredients that can still treat real symptoms. It works not because the pill has power, but because the patient's belief in the pill's power activates the body's own healing mechanisms. Belief is the active ingredient. Julia's story was the sugar pill. It lacked proof and facts. But if the pain was real, wasn't the temporary relief, the return of hope, a valid effect? It worked for a time because our society was collectively sick, afflicted by the chronic pain of the McCann case. We desperately craved a cure, and our shared belief in her story became the medicine itself. The pain temporarily subsided, hope rushed back in. The placebo was effective until the moment we collectively realized it was nothing but sugar. We've explored the need for closure, the myth of the returning child, and the mechanics of the narrative placebo. But this still doesn't explain the sheer global intensity of the reaction. Was the timing of this story, after 2 decades of silence, the real kindling for this wildfire? The answer isn't in her claims, or in the resemblance of her eyes, or the coloboma in her iris. The answer is in the story we as a society were profoundly ready to hear, and in the family secret that all of us deep down wanted to be true. Up to now, we've used concepts and theories, myths, placebos, psychology, to analyze the public reaction, creating a polite distance. Let's close that distance. Let's talk about you, about me, about us. The Julia Wendell saga wasn't merely a media circus. It was a global Rorschach test. You know the Rorschach test? The therapist shows you an abstract ink blot and asks, "What do you see here?" The ink blot itself is meaningless, a blank, ambiguous figure. But the image you project onto it reveals everything about your own fears, hopes, and deepest, most private desires. Julia Wendell was the ink blot. She presented herself as an ambiguous figure, a blank canvas. And we, like an audience starving for a resolution, projected onto her the script we were desperate to see played out. Some of us looked at the blot and saw a con artist, the personification of manipulation. Perhaps because we feel constantly deceived in our modern world, and we projected all our distrust onto her. Others saw a victim, a confused young woman with mental health issues being exploited by a click-hungry media machine. Perhaps because we often feel powerless against larger systems, and we projected our own vulnerability onto her. But many of us saw in that ink blot the face of a 3-year-old girl named Madeleine. We saw the miracle of a reunion. We saw a happy ending to a horror story. Does our need to believe in miracles suggest a deeper dissatisfaction with the reality of tragedy? The story was never truly about her. It was about what our collective unconscious revealed when it stared into the ambiguity. She wasn't the liar. She was the mirror. And what we saw was a reflection of our collective soul, complete with its scars, its fears, and its stubbornly childlike need for hope. In Jungian psychology, this process is called projection, attributing our own qualities, feelings, or desires to another person. We do this in our personal lives all the time, but the Julia case offered a rare glimpse of projection on a planetary scale. We, as a society, projected onto her blank screen the happy ending that the real McCann story has denied us for almost 20 years. She became the avatar of our hope, the vessel for our greatest desire. This places us before a deeply uncomfortable ethical dilemma that cuts to the core of this entire phenomenon. Imagine a loved one, someone you care about deeply, has a terminal illness. Doctors have confirmed there is nothing more to be done. They are depressed, merely waiting for the end. Then, a miracle treatment appears. A charlatan, perhaps, selling a sugar pill with zero scientific basis. Your family member clings to it. They transform. They begin to smile, make plans, and feel hope again. They spend their final months with a joy and peace you haven't seen in years. You know it's an illusion. You know the pill is just sugar. In the name of brutal honesty, would you risk destroying the only source of peace and happiness your loved one has left? Or would you allow the illusion to continue? There is no easy answer to that question. It's a dilemma that pits two virtues against each other: honesty and compassion. The Julia Wendell case placed us as a society in exactly this dilemma. The brutal truth is that the McCann case is an open wound, likely without a solution. The illusory compassion was Julia's story, and for a time we chose compassion. We chose the sugar pill. We chose the fleeting peace of illusion over the hard truth. How long can you truly resist that choice when the pain is chronic? The answer to that question says a lot about who we are. And maybe, just maybe, understanding that is more important than solving any crime. And so we reach the end of this journey. A journey that began with the analysis of a hoax, but ended with an analysis of ourselves. And if you at any point felt foolish, naive, or ashamed for having hoped in Julia Wendell's story, I'm here to tell you one thing as clearly and honestly as I can. Don't. You weren't deceived by a skillful liar. You were seduced by your own humanity. You were seduced by that part of you, that part that perhaps the cynicism of the world hasn't managed to kill yet, that still believes that stories of great peril can indeed have happy endings. You were seduced by your need, which is my need, which is the need of all of us, to find order in chaos, to find meaning in the meaningless. Wanting to believe was not a mistake. It was an act of survival by your psyche, trying to heal from a wound left open for too long. So please absolve yourself. Forgive your own hope. It is not your enemy. It is just proof that you are still alive. This brings us back to our symbol, the well, the dark, deep well at the center of this story. We started by thinking the purpose of the well was to find the truth, that if we tossed the right coin, if we made the right wish, the well would give us water, give us the answer. But we were looking at it the wrong way. What if the purpose of a well like this isn't to give answers, but to be a safe place to deposit our unanswered questions? Maybe its purpose is to be a memorial to uncertainty, a place where we can go look into the darkness and toss our coins of hope. Not because we expect something magical to happen, but because the act of hoping is in itself a profound relief. The well doesn't exist to give us what we want. It exists to receive our wanting, to collect our wishes and remind us that even in the deepest darkness, we are still capable of wishing for the light. And this is where we find the gift hidden within the disappointment. The experience of having believed in Julia and then being disillusioned, as painful as it was, offers us a wisdom that few other experiences could. It gives us the gift of self-knowledge. From now on, you have a new tool, a new question you can ask yourself, not just in high-profile disappearances, but in all areas of your life. When faced with a news story, a politician's promise, a belief you hold yourself, the question is, do I believe this because it's true or because I need it to be true? This small question is the difference between being a passive participant in your own illusions and becoming a conscious observer of your own mind. It's the difference between being carried away by the current of your desires and learning to navigate it. It is the wisdom of understanding that our greatest vulnerability is not the lie others tell us, but the story we ourselves are desperate to believe. And being aware of this vulnerability is the first step to becoming stronger. The coin we threw into the well didn't find water. The sound we heard was not that of truth. It was just the echo of our own hope hitting the empty bottom. But in hearing that silence, in confronting the echo, perhaps we found something much more important than the solution to a mystery. Perhaps finally we found ourselves. And this This clarity about our own nature is a much more useful and lasting truth than any answer that Well could ever give us. We didn't solve the McCann case, but maybe we've started to solve a little of the mystery that is us, and that in the end is the only investigation that really matters. And so the chronicle ends where it began, with a dark, deep well, and with us, all of humanity, leaning over its cold stone edge, tossing our coins of hope into the darkness. The particularly bright coin named Julia Wendell fell long ago, and the sound we heard was not of water, not of truth. It was just the hollow metallic echo of our hope hitting other coins, other theories, other hopes we had already thrown in there in a ritual that has been repeated for almost 20 years. The well is still there, dark, deep, and most importantly, full of our desires. And maybe, just maybe, it teaches us the deepest and most uncomfortable lesson of all. In the absence of truth, we humans become the storytellers. And the story we like to tell the most, the one we repeat in every culture, in every era, from the cave days to the TikTok age, is always the same. The story of redemption, of return, of closure. The story that spring always comes back, no matter how long, dark and brutal the winter has been. Personally, I can no longer look at the Julia Wendell phenomenon as proof of our stupidity or our naivete. I see it as proof of our humanity. A painful proof, perhaps, a proof that exposes our wounds and vulnerabilities, but proof nonetheless. The whole episode shows that even after almost 2 decades of a terrible story, of a puzzle with missing pieces, of a wound in the collective soul that never closes, we still have the capacity for hope. And that in such a cynical world so full of disillusionment is something we should look at with radical compassion, not with shame. We weren't fooled by a skillful liar. We were seduced by the most stubborn and perhaps most beautiful part of our own soul, the one that refuses to give up on a happy ending, even when all the evidence points to tragedy. We wanted to believe her, not because her story was good, but because our need for a miracle was immense. Because the biggest, most powerful, most dangerous hoax is not the lie they tell us. It's the story we desperately need to be true. If this chronicle helped you look at this case, and perhaps more importantly at yourself, in a different way, if it helped you forgive your own hopeful nature and understand the overwhelming force of your own hope, and if you believe that understanding our own psychology is the first and most crucial step to not being victims of it, there are stories the world prefers to keep in black and white, guilty or innocent, truth or lie, hero or villain, because gray is uncomfortable. Gray forces us to think, to feel, to confront the complexity of the world and of ourselves. If you believe, as I do, that it is in the gray that human truth resides, and that this work of exploring these twilight zones, these nebulous areas of the psyche is important, contributing to this channel, and I want you to understand this deeply, is not a request. It's not about money. It's a symbol. It's a recognition of this shared journey we took today. It's a sign that you no longer seek easy answers, but that you have the courage to sit with the difficult questions and endure the discomfort of silence. It's your way of saying to anyone who will listen, to the universe, to yourself, it wasn't about her. It was about us. Now, after everything we've been through together here, I want to know what this stirred up inside you. What was the story you told yourself during the Julia case? Be honest with yourself. Was it a story of hope, of anger, of distrust? Did you feel like a detective, a judge, or a fan waiting for a miracle? What did your reaction to her teach you about yourself, about your own needs, about your own wounds? Leave your thoughts in the comments. You don't need to have the answer. Nobody does. Sometimes the question is more important, but let it be real. Let it come from that quiet place we visited today. I will read every single one, because not all silence is forgetting, and every voice that recognizes its own humanity is a small light against the darkness of easy judgment. And for those who felt that this story, as much as it seems like an end, is actually a beginning, you are absolutely right. Because if we understood that our reaction to the McCann case is a reflection of our desperate need for a narrative that opens another door, an even darker door leading to a much more disturbing hallway. The question that hangs in the air, that echoes in the empty theater, is, if we are so vulnerable to the need for a story, who is benefiting from it? Who are the storytellers profiting from our hope? We looked at our reflection in the well, but we haven't yet looked at who dug the well, who benefits from keeping this story alive, from keeping this wound open so that we continue to throw our coins of attention and emotion. We analyze the psychology of the public, but we haven't yet analyzed the psychology of the players. The parents, Kate and Gerry McCann, the investigators, the media, the psychics, and all the other actors who feed on this drama. That's where we're going next. We're moving from self-analysis back to case analysis, but with this new tool, with this new understanding of our own vulnerability. If you want to continue on this journey, if you want to understand not just why we believe, but who benefits from our belief, subscribe to the channel. We're going to start following the trail of money, power, and narrative. Because if Julia's story was a distraction, the obvious question is, a distraction from what? The story of Julia Wendell wasn't about a Polish girl. It was about you. It was about that part of you that desperately needed a happy ending to a horror story. And they used that exact thing against you. Let's be honest. When that story blew up, a part of you wanted to believe. Oh, there's no need to be ashamed of that. Hope isn't a flaw, it's a survival instinct. As you reflect on this journey, on the echoes of hope and the clarity of self-discovery, what is the single most important action you feel compelled to take, whether it's forgiving your own vulnerability, seeking out a new truth, or simply questioning the next headline you read? Thanks for watching. How do you feel about these arguments and theories? Does it give you a different perspective on the case? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to receive the latest notifications.